提到苹果电脑的发明人，以及他也是20世纪影响全球经济发展最关键的5人之一哦。他更是当代的电子奇才，以及也是全球10大的骇客之一。那现在让我们以最热烈的掌声来欢迎我们的 Mr. Steve Woods， 谢谢，掌声鼓励。
So good to be here in Taiwan, my first time. I asked for some Thai currency, and I think I got Thailand. Well, it's been a long road. Engineering and invention are two quite different things. And Apple Computer has been such a highlight of my life. Apple Computer pretty much believes it's a company for the people. When Steve and I started the company, we hired an agency who said you can't have the name Apple. You have to have a name that symbolizes big computing power, raw computation. And we said, no, the name Apple's right, because computers are no longer going to be in the stale corporate environment. We're building a computer for homes. The apple symbolizes fresh fruit, symbolizes education, symbolizes so many good things in America. So we had to hang on to that name. Very often it boils down to who is the master, the human or the technology? Do you ever feel like you're sometimes a slave to your technology, having to do things the way someone else thought up, not the way you want to solve your problems? So we put our emphasis on always making the human more important. When we developed our Lisa computer, the first GUI computer for the masses, the first graphical computer for the masses, we did a lot of testing. We had a guy named Jeff Raskin, and Jeff talked to Steve Jobs and myself and told us that you can make a computer that has the same processing power, the same circuitry as another computer, and can do just as much work, but you can make it work in a nice way, a friendly way, an understandable way. And then when a newcomer comes up, a 10-year-old child or somebody who's never seen a computer in their life, they can easily learn how to use it. Whereas the old computers, you had to be a computer expert, trained in esoteric science, computer science, to be able to touch the computer and flip the right switches to make it work. When we developed our version of the graphic user interface computer, the Lisa, we hired a lot of very bright academicians. Some were in the education field that knew how to present things to people that didn't already know how to use them. In other words, the computer had to teach people how to use it itself. The computer that I developed, the Apple II, was developed along these lines too, even though it wasn't a graphical user machine. I had learned about computers not from courses in schools. In fact, when I went to college, you had to take a graduate level course for the minimum course in computers. I had learned by stumbling across computer manuals, computer journals, and chip manuals from the makers in Silicon Valley, where I lived. And I thought it out in my head, and I read things, and I learned to love this science of computers. But I watched other people's programs and the way other people connected circuits together with wires, and that's how I had learned. So when I developed the Apple II, I wanted it to be presented in a way that other people would be able to learn how computers work by using them so easily and quickly they could start typing instructions into a computer and instantly getting results and seeing, oh my gosh, it's not that hard. Now I know how it's done. I wanted them to learn the same way. Well, with our Lisa computer, which was the predecessor of the Macintosh, we hired these top people that believed in that kind of thinking to make the product simple. Our thinking was, just like with the Apple II, we will put in a lot of our work and our sweat and our software to make the computer work in an understandable way to normal people. And we did a lot of testing with the Lisa computer. We took children, we took men, we took women, people who had never been around computers in their life, and we put them in a room alone. And the room had two-way mirrors that we could look through and watch them. And we would sit them down in front of the hardware with a mouse that was to become this first graphic computer. And they would sit down and we would leave the room. There was no one to tell them what to do. They had no instructions before. They were just told to try to figure out what they could do with the machine. And they might discover that this little mouse that moved around caused a cursor on a screen to move. And they might discover that there were some menus that would drop down and they would play with some of the options. Little icons on the left and right that looked like paintbrushes and pencils and erasers. They would figure out the function just by looking at the pictures. We played around with which icons, which pictures worked the best, how many menus, where the menus were, what the words were, the size of the fonts. We tested and tested and tested until people would sit down knowing nothing and get very, very far along and be able to start painting pictures on their own with absolutely no knowledge of what they were going to do when they came in. And that was how we developed the basic user interface guidelines, how programs should look to a user so that you can walk in and just looking at the screen will teach you how to use a program. And it was really, that was really putting the human more important than the technology. When the technology is the master, which I don't like, it's like you have all the buttons and all the functionality somewhere, but you have to learn where they are and how to find them and how to use them, and it doesn't make sense to you. We're still developing a lot of great products that are changing the world. The personal computer was, but one step. The Macintosh, the graphic user interface was another step. Now we think, well, the computing experience hasn't really changed in the last 10 years. We have the internet, we can look things up, we can do our word processing and our PowerPoints, and we did that 10 years ago. But really, great new products, are changing the way we live our lives in other ways. The iPod brought back the Walkman revolution, of music to people. And the iPhone is showing the world that, my gosh, we thought that cellular phones had evolved so much that it was sort of expected what was in a cellular phone. And here comes a brand new one. Of course, it has to be from Apple that works in such a different way. And sometimes it can't do as much, and sometimes it can't do it as fast, but it sure does it in a fun way. It sure is fun to use, and that's what makes people fall in love with products. So at Apple, we've always tried to have the sort of products that people don't say, I use it for my job, it really gets my work done, but rather they say, I love this computer. It's just so nice. I would never give it up. It's part of me. These days, a lot of the products that you buy can, in the old days, I felt that, well, a computer is a platform. A computer can do a million different things. And you could build 20 different things into one computer. And I thought any time you can make a device small and handheld, it should go off and be a device on its own because it's easier for the mind to keep track of separate things. But nowadays that formula is changing a lot. Sometime in the past, if you wanted to build two products in one, let's say a music player and a video player, or a music player and a cell phone, you had to double the price and pay the price for each. But now these products are very common because a music player is like one chip, and a cell phone is almost like one chip, a couple of chips. And you just add a couple of chips and a couple of bucks to a product, and the cost hardly goes up at all. So we have so many products that are not only GPS navigation systems, and they're also video displays and photo displays and music displays, and they're all multiple. So the formula really has changed. One of the biggest changes, of course, is building the camera into almost every cell phone. In the old days, I would have said, no, you should have two separate nice products that do their job optimally each. But now, really, it's so nice to have the camera always with you and always on you, and it costs almost nothing when it's built into these days. And that's because we've gotten so advanced with so many transistors on a piece of silicon. A lot of the change in future products boils down to materials. I was brought up learning electronics from the starting point of the structure of atoms and electrons and what caused them to flow through wires and the formulas to calculate how things work.
And I like that idea of understanding from the atoms on up.